Thank you. Can you hear me? Have we got the volume up? Were we good? Wow, what an opportunity to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you to the board. Thank you to the guests. Thank you to all the honorable members, the students, the volunteers here today. What a wonderful conference this is. I can tell you, yes, I have attended dozens of conferences like this around the world, and mostly they're not interesting. They're very technical. This conference is stunningly good. It's exciting because it talks about the changes that are going on in our profession as they represent the changes in the world. And we have got to start looking into the future in order to change our profession and grow the future of our members so that we can make a contribution to India achieving the $5 trillion. You agree? Anyway, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I am a management accountant. I started as a management accountant. I have a CMA initially from Great Britain. I'm now an FCMA and a CGMA. But I can tell you that that has facilitated a career that has been exciting and full of interesting things to do. And I wish that all of you had the same experience that I have had. And very productive. I know that many of you who are about my age and maybe a little older have also had very fulfilling careers. But this career will provide you a pathway to a wonderful life. So do not ever think that this may be the thing you want to do or wonder how far you might go. The world is your oyster. I can tell you very quickly, I started as a cost accountant, and I did standard costing, but when I did that, we had one of those machines that you had a handle on the side. Does anybody remember those? You go that way to add and that way to subtract. Isn't that funny? And Cardex cards, right, and files, and you pull the card out and you write on it in pencil. And then after that, I became an analyst working for a pharmaceutical company. And gradually, I moved around, and eventually I worked for a company called Northern Telecom, Nortel, bankrupt, not by me. But there I was controller of a number of divisions and later director of the Canadian operations and the head office accounting operations. And I left there to become a consultant. And as a result of the background I got in Nortel, I was able to start up a consulting firm to focus on implementation of activity-based costing. And the result of that was I implemented activity-based costing in perhaps 100 countries around the world and got to know people like Bob Kaplan and Robin Cooper really well. And that allowed me then to develop my network. From there, after about 20 years, I was given the opportunity to run the Institute of Management Accountants. So I was the president and CEO of the Institute of Management Accountants. Some of the gentlemen in this room I met in my office in New Jersey. And of course, I came to Hyderabad to the 2007 conference where I was given the honor of being the keynote speaker. But I thank you all for that. And it's been a wonderful experience to work with you all. It turned around, it came upon me in 2000, through the period 2002 through 2008, that the accounting world was going through very difficult times. You remember WorldCom and Enron and Parmalat and the failure, and the accounting firms felt the need to assert control. Let's focus on better, more accurate financial results. And you know what? I remember people saying, was it Yogi Berra said, the definition of insanity is to try and do more, to try to get better by doing more of the same things, right? And you end up with 500-page annual reports that people don't read. And do you know what happens with what financial reporting is about? It's necessary but insufficient to create value in our corporations. Value is not created by reporting. Reporting simply says that the people who run this business provide us the confidence because we can demonstrate that they've done what they said they will do. Full stop. Value is something else. And so I'm going to move on into the little presentation I have here. I'm very excited to be with Daoping Gao because it turns out that one of her colleagues in China was a friend of mine, Jilian Yang, And he mentored you, I understand. So it's very exciting. So what a great place to be. I feel, ladies and gentlemen, I'm at home with colleagues. Since I left the IMA, I have now become an elected official. I'm a politician, I apologize. But the value of that is I have moved from business into a world where I do have to worry about the integrated concerns, about the capitals. I have to worry about nature. The reason I can't stay longer is because on Monday we're in session discussing what our policies will be to mitigate climate change and how much money we're going to invest into it. It's just one of those things that we have to do in order to look after our community. I am totally dedicated to the idea of various capitals and looking after our community and our people going into the future. But if we come back to the various capitals, the different skills that everybody in the organization needs to have has to work differently. So for example, my experience is that most corporations are structured like silos. We have ourselves speaking our language. We have marketing people speaking their language. We have engineers speaking their language. And what we have to do is find ways to bring that all together. You know, the thing about us finance people, you know, we understand the language of money. And we have to make sure we continue to understand the language of money and help others and ourselves to put it all together. So when I talk about today, the idea of corporate performance, but it can be expanded to include government, and that's a longer story that I can share today. But we're going to talk about creating shareholder value and how to leverage cost and performance management knowledge. Notice that to me, cost actually should be now referred to as resources because the world has changed. I've talked about myself. So the way that we see the world now is that the primary mechanism for valuing corporations in shareholder value is through discounted future cash flow. And it is in that context that we actually have to think about how we should measure revenue streams, cost streams, profit, and relative to a strategic planning horizon. And that requires us to shift away from our former techniques into something that is more integrated, that looks at the notion of value as being multi-attribute and multi-dimensional. So back to integrated reporting and 7 capitals. Integrated reporting. I'm having thank you. So our key objective in industry is to increase shareholder value. So I recognize that in China, the goals are, the management, the governance model is a little different. But when we're addressing market-oriented industry, as we have here in India, as well as in North America, many countries around the world, then we have to start thinking rather more differently about the way in which we do measurement to support that. So increasing shareholder value means making informed decisions with a focus on future performance. And I'll come back to the notion of future versus past versus present. Because you and I know that the decisions that we make today have no effect on what has just happened. Correct? The decisions we make today only influence what will happen tomorrow. And therefore, we always have to keep an eye on the future. And today it's more critical than ever. So I just want to talk about the rate of change. 1988, 30 years ago, is that right? $9.7 trillion was the value of the world of corporate values listed globally. In 2018, $68.7 trillion. So we have increased the value of corporations around the globe by 7 times. That is huge. And look at the rate of acceleration of it. This is not a trivial consideration. Recognize also that global manufacturing is now 17% of our global economy. A little bit, it was pretty much all of the value in 1988. But today is only 17% of our corporate values. In Canada, it's 15% is manufacturing. In India, it's 23%. We'll come back to that. Issue number one, the rate of change. Issue number two is the nature of change. Because in that same time frame, we have seen, as we've seen change and growth accelerate, what we also know is that we've seen a shift from manufacturing to service, from the tangible to the intangible. And in that context, we must expect volatility. Because you know as well as I do that something can go bankrupt. We had the examples from Graham earlier about how the banks, Bear Stearns, all those companies that had huge value based on some belief. But when that belief disappeared, the value disappeared. So that speaks volumes as to the way in which we understand value and how we measure it and how we continue to keep an eye on whether, in fact, it is correct. So change equals increased risk. Do you know, when I was at Nortel, we were doing strategic financial plans around new product launch. Risk was not even included in those analyses. Do you remember that, for those of you who were around 20, 30, 40 years ago? How often did we worry about risks? It was very small, right? So, but today, we cannot exist without thinking about risk. In my own ward, back in Burlington, the city I live, in 2014, we had a rainstorm that fell essentially over about 2 square miles that I'm responsible for. And we had about 120, 180 milliliters in 6 hours, and 3,500 homes were flooded with sewage. Can you imagine that? We had an ice storm the year before. We had in 2008, you will recall, the credit markets melted. Things are happening all the time that are changing our lives. And of course, climate change. Having said that, that is something we have to work on to ensure we understand mitigating steps. But it also means increased opportunities. So for example, while we're talking about climate change mitigation, we're also launching thousands of companies that are building green products, green buildings. We know that, in fact, in our own little town, that we can expect to see billions of dollars of increased taxes and revenue as a result of green industries moving into our neighborhood, especially because we will stimulate that. I just recently bought an electric car. Now I have to have an electric device so I can plug my car in. It means that we have to stimulate the economy and our electrical utility corporation to begin putting in new transformers, new supplies of electricity, new places to plug our cars in. And we know we can reduce carbon emissions by 40% when we get to 100% usage of electric vehicles, right? We also know that we can improve our economy by changing our building codes to require different types of heating. So heat pumps, more insulation, thicker walls, and that will increase the building opportunities, and it'll increase the revenues, and it'll increase taxes. So we're not in a position where we need to be afraid. We do know that we have to invest in infrastructure to deal with climate change, and we have to take steps to reduce carbon emissions. But those are all good human opportunities, not only for us, but for our kids and grandchildren, right? Management accounting can contribute to that by identifying opportunities and providing understanding of return on investment, on investing in green technologies, and you can do that. But increased volatility demands we have better information. The very notion of standards can be challenging. Because not only do we have volatility and business opportunities, but we also have changing technologies. We also know that we can be beaten by a competitor in our same field, somebody we didn't even know existed, and it can happen overnight, which says that we have to have a very, very careful control over information. Back to 96, Alfred Rappaport, the famous Alfred Rappaport, said we really have to focus on complete, accurate, timely information defined in terms of behaviors that maximize shareholder value for the long run. Discounted future cash flow doesn't happen only except in the long term. Annual, short-term measurement, short-term management, allocation of overhead based on an annual volume doesn't tell us what's going on in the business. It tells us a standard that people will then relate to, but may not actually do the right thing for the business. So the principle here that Rappaport had, and he had a number of them, was make strategic decisions that maximize expected value even at the expense of lowering short-term earnings. Which means you've got to start thinking for the long term, and you've got to start taking risks, and you have to decide on what the risks are, and you have to take steps to mitigate them. So what does it mean when we have increased competition? When we have unforeseen market demand? When we have fluctuations in currencies and investments? We need to have a strategy. I've done a lot of work with strategy analysis, strategy formulation. You will appreciate the reason for performing strategy formulation is to prioritize resource allocation. That's its primary purpose. Do you agree? Which says that we have to ask ourselves, then, what are the critical questions that we need? So I'll offer you, there are 13. The first one is, what values are you going to bring to the business? Okay. How far down the road are we going to look? So that starts talking about us thinking about a strategic planning horizon. And it may be a major investment. In the case of the city and the region where I'm an elected official, it's 25 years for the community. But you all know politicians only think to the next election, right? So we have changed the dynamic and the metric for our government entity to think about the community and plan 25 years out. And you might say 25 years is a long time, but it's 25 years because that's how long the infrastructure lasts, the roads and the buildings, right? And we have to think about refinancing them. So what assumptions are we going to make about the external environment that underpin our strategy? What existing and new products and services will we offer or not? What criteria will we use to evaluate new product opportunities? What existing and new customer groups will we serve and which we will not? Okay, so you say, what's that got to do with cost, with management accountants? Well, everything, because you can't know the answers to the questions about products and services unless you understand the cost, right? You can't understand the question about new products without understanding the cost, and we can't understand about which customers we're going to serve unless we understand customer profitability, right? Which means we have to have the techniques to make sure we value those. Then we have further questions. What criteria will we use to evaluate new market opportunities? What factors, price, and/or quality aspects are meaningful to our customers? What factors will represent our competitive advantage? And in which of our current product market areas will we place the greatest emphasis? I can't read that. And what new product or market areas will we place the greatest emphasis? What financial, non-financial measures will we use to assess the viability of the strategy? And when you look at those, every single one of them requires your attention. Do you agree? Are you doing that now? Are you answering these questions now? Something to think about. And then we get to, how does the implementation plan ensure that our goals, our designs, our performance measures Performance measures our management of departments, our processes, and the positions, and our people support strategy. And then we get the big gold star, because we have to understand money to link everything together. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm proposing to you is that we need to think strategically about what management accounting is about. We need to think about how we orient it towards the future on a dynamic basis. And you have a role in everything. And then you have to deal with technology. We've all gone through years where we didn't have the right data, where we found we would go into an ops review or an executive meeting, and we'd find that the accountant says, well, the operations people, they made an error, or something wasn't delivered on time. And then the operations people say, what? We delivered everything on time. Have you ever had that experience? Right? There was disagreement between management. No, but now the operations data becomes available through ERP and through operating systems. We do have the availability to get one version of the truth. Now we have the ability to grab data and manipulate it. So you know about business intelligence software. How many of you have business intelligence software? Okay. Some of us. So we need to have access to the data. We need to be able to analyze it. And we need to be able to extract the information to provide meaningful information to our executives on a continuous basis. And for that, we have to think about the technology. So we have some great news nowadays. I, for example, am working with a client in Germany, on top of my other interests, who is trying to enter into the United States market. But my client in Germany is probably the leading implementer of SAP S/4HANA in the world. And SAP S/4HANA, if you're not familiar with it, is probably the most advanced analytics ERP-based system on earth. And what it does is allows us to give us all the power we need to provide management with the ability to make informed decisions. So if you were to ask me how I feel a management accountant should be thinking, what they should be doing, I would suggest to you that the #1 job is to provide information to decision makers to help them make better choices. That is a relative matter, is not a precise matter. It requires judgment. It requires professionalism. It requires wisdom. One of the opportunities, a tool I'm used to working with now, is corporate performance management, and we use something called OLAP. Anybody familiar with online analytical planning? What we do is we suck the data out of the operating systems, all of them, out of the general ledger, and we build multi-attribute, multi-dimensional analytic tools by which we can extract data and provide reporting and actually automate all financial reporting. Automate it. Get the people out of that process. Bringing together 3 dimensions: strategic planning, sales and operational planning, financial planning. So we've got directions and targets, objectives, risk assessment, direct driver-based simulation, what-if and ad hoc analysis, customer product profitability, communication, BI, and one version of the truth for strategy. And when it gets into financial planning, budgeting, forecasting, reporting, everything you're familiar with. And then on the sales and operations side, sales planning, workforce planning, right the way down to process measurement, management, cost management. So what I'm suggesting to you in terms of the integration that we were talking about with integrated reporting, we have the tools, the software mechanisms, and these are user-defined. You don't need IT to use these tools. You can do it yourselves, or you can do this sort of thing with Excel and pivot tables. The technology is available to us. I'm not going to be speaking for a lot longer. I'm going to get to a point. There are still a whole lot of other slides that I will not cover that talk to cost accounting methods, and I'll just mention them briefly. But here is a thought that I really think is important, that cost accounting, as we understood it, as we listen to the examples of academic views on costing, they always focus on manufacturing and premised on industrial age logic. So it used to be when my dad, by the way, is 98 years old. He's still driving. He just got a new girlfriend. And they together have moved into a condominium, an apartment together. What do you think? I think it's pretty special. So this same gentleman, when he was working, could go out for lunch and have 2 or 3 martinis because it didn't matter. The business was not going to explode that day. Who can do that now? You're still doing emails at midnight, right? So we could have a 1 to 3 year plan. Everything was pretty stable. The shareholder value was incremental. Financial issues, assets such as inventories were key drivers of shareholder value. In all of it, tangible assets, products and strategy life cycles were long. Cost increases could be passed along. How do you do pricing? Oh, you just calculate the cost and add 15% or 30%. Isn't that right? Not anymore. They are unrelated. It's defined by market. Suppliers were in charge of the markets and customers were reasonably loyal. Gaming of the numbers and managing earnings were accepted practices, but not anymore. Now we have to think about today. Managers need to respond rapidly to change. How many emails do you get a day? I have 2 cell phones. I get hundreds of emails every day. Shareholders now demand not best in class, not leading in class. Now they want what's coming next, right? So when you think about $5 trillion, you've got to be thinking ahead of the curve. You've got to be watching the technologies that are coming because they will kill whatever is in front of you. Intellectual assets such as loyal customers are the key drivers of shareholder value. My colleagues in Germany, what we're focusing on as we go into the United States is not how many consultants we should hire, not whether we should get an office, it's how much should we invest in building thought leadership situation where we're putting out ideas through LinkedIn and Facebook and all of the various tools we have available to us to publicize who we are and what we believe. Our other issue is brand building. So it's gone from worrying about investing in infrastructure and people to worrying about investing in intellectual capital. That will buy us way more than spending money on bricks and mortar and people. Products and strategy life cycles are short. Costs need to be constantly reduced to respond to the competitive pressure. Customers in charge, gaming the numbers are unacceptable. This is a different world. And we have to change our methods and practices to accord. Finally, just before we get too far, I want to give you a thought. You know, financial reporting is hindsight. It is where we've been. What Kaplan would say is we can't drive the car by looking in the rearview mirror. Because by the time we've got those results, we've already made the decisions about the future. In fact, we might have already destroyed the company and we didn't know it. So we have to think about 3 perspectives with respect to information. Hindsight, insight, what's happening right this moment, and foresight, where do we want to go? This must be the premise of management accounting. Do you agree? Okay, and we can do it. We have the tools to do it. And in those components, we got descriptive analytics, diagnostic analytics, predictive analytics, and prescriptive analytics. And once we get out towards the end, we're getting pretty fancy because we're only at the beginning of this journey. How many of us are already into what is simulations? We need to get there just as the next fundamental step. And that can be captured along with oversight and decision-making because in the end, business is human. There is nothing that we can define as standards because people change everything. Circumstances and opportunities change. So getting towards the end of my comments here, keep in mind when we start thinking about the integration of information through analytics, using OLAP tools, and BI. Then we can talk about past results. We can automate financial reporting. We can talk about in-the-moment data and reports. So for example, if you're in the hedging business, you might get off a plane as you arrive here in New Delhi from somewhere like New York, and you might get an indicator on your phone that you've gone above a control standard, right there, through BI. Important. You can react immediately, but you also have to think about the future for long-term planning and value understanding. So the CPM tool needs a tool, and we need tools in management accounting, some more sophisticated, some less sophisticated. But in the end, we need things to do things like rolling forecasts, simulation modeling, revised projections, and revised goals. There are people, and I can point case studies, for example, Arc'teryx. Are you familiar with the name company Arc'teryx? They make mountain climbing clothing. They can do a global forecast update anytime with 1 hour for the whole company because they have the technology. And dashboards, et cetera, et cetera. So we have you become the orchestra leader. You become the people who are doing the analysis, who are doing the forecasting, and you are preparing management to make choices every day. And you have to be the thought leader. So, but it comes down to you. So my favorite rock star, can you guess who that would be? It was Mick Jagger. Right? Why Mick Jagger? Because he was not afraid. He was audacious. Little ideas become big things. Hewlett Packard, they started making electronic gizmos in their garage, and it became a huge thing. So we never believed that a few caring people can't change the world because that's all who ever have. So if not you, and if not our colleagues in this room, who is going to change the management accounting profession? Are you responsible or is somebody else? You! Put your hands up. Are you responsible? Yes! Thank you. And I'm there with you. So along the way, and I'm going to stop after this slide, and I appreciate your patience with me. As we look into the future of management accounting, we have to change our curriculum. We have to change the way we think about our role. What we need to think about is the future. That says that when we do a strategic plan, when our executives agree on a future, we must put money on it. And we must decide what resources we're going to invest, and we must decide what we're going to stop doing. Do you agree? That might be, that'll give us the ability to calculate cash requirements for the next, 5 to 25 years, depending on your business, the nature of your business and the strategic planning horizon. Then we're going to have a business plan premised on the strategic plan that will deal with maybe the next 3 to 5 years. The first year of which will be the budget, and we'll renew that every year, always transcending the end of the year. We'll do rolling forecasts. I'm not a big fan of budgets, specifically. We do them, but I'm thinking they're not sensitive to changes on a continuous basis. And I'm thinking that we should be willing to update those on a continuous basis. Target setting, we must have KPIs, and they must align organization goals and processes and job activities. And I have, in my slides, you'll see a description of how we do that. It follows these slides. I won't go through them. We must do risk management, but not risk registry. You know, you've been hearing from COSO and so many people that we need to do risk registries, but risk registries are passive. There's a new mechanism called objective centric, which allows you to take a look at the strategic goals, do risk analysis, and identify the mitigating steps, and take out insurance about the ones that are not covered. That can be done differently, and that is dynamic, and operations management are responsible for them continuously. I'm an activity-based costing guy, I admit it. I've written dozens and dozens of articles about it, implemented it with hundreds of corporations. I'm not going to talk about it, but I love it. I continue to love ABC because it allows us to get information that crosses all boundaries. And we can make informed choices about what product, service, processes cost. Target costing. If you take a look at the slides from CAMI, the target costing mechanism sits exactly with the idea of discounted future cash flow. You've got to have process costing. The very notion of process of management is uncommon. And yet, processes are the only things that link strategy to jobs. Because otherwise, we have silos that have concrete barriers around them, and we can't cross them. So we have to have process management, which means we've got to have, yes, we do have to have budgets for those. We have to have aligned roles and responsibilities. We need to have service and product profitability. We need to have customer profitability, and we need to have strategic investment lifecycle costing, right? Costing is important. It doesn't go away. It just needs to be different. And finally, we must do simulation modeling and what-if analysis. So when you're looking at a 20-year strategic plan or strategic investment, you need to give your executives 5 or 6 simulations, what-if analysis about a set of assumptions. You do this, you get that. You do this, you get that. Change your mode to not being precise, but being directionally oriented. Every plan in the world, by definition, is wrong. So therefore, what you have to do is provide wisdom and help people make judgments about most likely, and then monitor it and track it and change it frequently. That should be our role. Do you agree? And then finally, we've got to take advantage of BI and ERP and OLAP and all the tools available to us. Anyway, I'm just going to skip through all of these slides. They're all there. They'll be in the package you get. And I just want to focus on saying thank you. You know, I'm very alert that Belinda was in. Where's Belinda gone? The president of the institute here. His good friend in Canada, Devinder Bhatia, connected me into this discussion, and I'm very grateful to Devinder for having me, having organized that, and I'm very grateful to all of you for having me. Thank you. I look forward to speaking to you whenever you wish. Thank you very much.